So our next speaker is, I'm so excited to introduce this person because not only are they an incredible attorney in Dallas, as a fellow St. Mary's alumnus, it's always great to introduce someone that also went to St. Mary's Law School. So Adrian Bauer is our next guest. He will be telling us how to weather the next storm. We never saw COVID-19 happen. So at this point, anything goes. We've got murder hornets on the horizon, it feels like. So he's going to tell us preparing your business to weather the next storm, lessons from COVID-19. Adrian, as I said, graduated from University of Texas at Austin in 2007 and from St. Mary's Law School in 2011. While attending law school, he developed his passion for law, bar service, and his desire to open his own firm. Despite being a newly licensed lawyer, Adrian took the bold step to hang his own shingle and open his own Dallas law practice. In his practice, Adrian focuses on civil litigation and transactional oil and gas matters. Adrian has represented numerous clients, resulting in millions of dollars recovered from his clients. For his outstanding work, Adrian has been named one of D Magazine's best attorneys under 40. His background has uniquely positioned him to be the perfect person to help companies overcome and prepare for the unknown. We are excited to have you, and welcome, Adrian.
But thank you all so much for inviting me to be here today and talk about how COVID's affected us and what we can look forward to next time and things that we can do to minimize the impacts that it's had, to improve our businesses and to survive, because that's really step one. So that's what we'll get into. And in order to survive in terms of our business, we need several things. The first among those is profitability. If it needs to function internally, if the processes you have to run your business aren't in order, then you're not going to be able to deliver your product. You need to be able to address your customers' needs. They need to know that you're in business. They need to know that you can keep satisfying what they come to you for. And then ultimately, you need to keep the government and your community happy. Even to the extent that you don't think you have a lot of interaction with them on a day-to-day basis. In times of struggle like COVID-19, all of a sudden your non-customers and local and state and federal governments are going to be more in your business. We've seen that with lockdowns. We've seen that with the inability of people to come to work or host their businesses, restaurants. So we'll talk a lot about a lot of those things and how they impact different kinds of businesses. I understand that there may be a lot of non-law firms here today. And so while I can speak a lot to businesses as it relates to law firms, we also have clients at our office that operate in a variety of industries. So I've been able to learn how a lot of those companies are struggling or flourishing in these trying times. Profitability. The issue and analysis here is largely based on profitability. I think in my second point there, I've illustrated that if you're not trying to make profit, then it's not really a business. You may be running a charity, a hobby, or a scam. The point of this presentation is not to knock charities or anything. Go do that work. But in terms of a business surviving, it's about the business. You need to keep the business going. And if you don't, then your employees may be going elsewhere. Your product may not reach your customers. Knowing your business is key to this. I imagine we'll have a lot of different people here today from companies that provide different things. At a law firm, we provide services. At a manufacturer, you may provide goods. Other places sell time. You need to know what it takes to keep doing what you do. Part of that is your obligations. This goes to your baseline. What are the things you need to do to keep operating? The biggest costs here may differ from business to business. In manufacturing, I imagine payroll is a huge part of that. Rent, is it important that your people come to offices? And out in Silicon Valley, they've cut down on people coming into the office a lot. That's likely happened a lot here in Texas too. You may notice if you're going into your offices that your parking garages are rather empty. Inventory. is your business heavily dependent on that? For a law firm, maybe not. But if you're selling goods or involved in manufacturing, that's going to be key. There are a few things that you can do to adjust these. Costs may be negotiable. All these companies are going to be interwoven in a sense with their supply chains. Some people need to keep cash flow going in order to pay their necessities. So each of these companies involved in the chain of, the origin of products to the end user are all going to be having to make these analyses, and everybody wants the revenue to keep coming in. And so there may be leveraging that you can do here to make sure that you're still getting the necessities to perform the things that your business needs to do to keep that revenue coming in, to keep your employees happy, to keep you making money. Debt's an option. I know the government has come out with several different programs under the CARES Act to deal with this, and the debt available under those has been incredible. Whether it be the EIDL or the PPP, the interest rates on some of those are sub 4%, I think, and in some instances 1%. So if the debt is available, that may be something that allows you to leverage the storm at costs you never thought possible at extremely friendly terms. Keeping on with the idea that a lot of these businesses are different in how they operate. The revenue cycle can be different. It can be flat and steady. If you're running a restaurant, I imagine that you have an idea about how many customers you need to come in, an average ticket per table. But there are other instances, that may be project-based. For somebody doing big construction work, you may get paid based on how much work you're doing. There are other companies still that have cyclical revenue cycles. And a big example of that we may see is the retailers, especially related to the Black Friday and December holidays. Bunch of companies out there are making a ton of their money around November and December, whereas an accounting firm, for example, may do a ton of their work in anticipation of tax season in April or September, October. So knowing your cash flows gives you a chance to adapt. If you don't know that, you're playing in the dark and you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to use the tools that can best get you to the other side of an event like this, especially when we don't know how long it is. You don't want one of those big down revenue times to cost your business to have to shutter. Here's an interesting analysis that I like to employ in my business, and I think people can do that no matter what kind of business they have. It obviously helps a lot more in the steady type, but you can average this out. The simple premise is that there are 250 work days in a year. So every $400, we can call it revenue right now, that you make on a work day turns into $100,000 extrapolated to the year. So with this, you can apply it to revenues. If you've got a business that only needs $100,000 a year, you only need to make $400 a year. Now you've got to apply it to all your costs at some point, but you can use the same metric to analyze your profits. If $400 a day is your profit, you can do that. You can multiply each of these figures by 10. That'll get you to $1 million in revenue. So this simple math allows you to understand your needs in bite-sized pieces. And if you run the analytics on this, you can really time it out to understand how your business is doing and what you're going to need. Okay, we've talked about the cyclical revenue a little bit with a construction project and other industries too. If your revenue doesn't come in until the close of a project, you really need to figure out whether you're going to be able to continue to pay your employees throughout the term. Can you continue to pay your rent during that time? Do you need to renegotiate some of those things? You may need to be careful with those renegotiations when it comes to your employees. And we'll talk about that later, especially in the context of government assistance, because as we've seen with the CARES Act, there are conditions on how many of your employees you need to keep on in order to qualify for certain levels of the relief that's being granted. But here, if you've got a project that's closing in 3 months and you've only got revenue or cash on hand to take care of your needs for the next 2, you've got a problem, and you're going to need to find a way to bridge that gap. Here's another little opportunity that can be used for businesses that rely on closing projects to get revenue. You don't necessarily need to do a big job all the time. You know, the way I like to refer to this in my business is base hits and home runs. You know, in our law practice, we do both hourly and contingent work. And the general attitude we take for that is we need to do enough hourly work to cover all the business's expenses, including rent, staffing, costs, everything like that. And then we do a bunch of contingent work that really drives the profits of the company. So if you can find a way to do that, to do little work, to make sure your necessities are being taken care of, those jobs tend to complete faster, and they tend to help ensure that you're there doing business tomorrow. Your employees, these are key. These are the people that ensure that the job is done. Now, I don't know of a lot of businesses where it's a single person who can handle every single aspect of it. There are certainly sole proprietorships out there and single member companies who do incredible things. But you know, that person needs to be available to do the work too. And especially in a small business, where one person is driving all the work, they've got to balance their home life also. But the same is true of your other employees. Each of them has their own home life. They've got their own concerns they're dealing with. In a pandemic like COVID-19, they've got family members they need to attend to. They've got to address needs like childcare. So taking care of your people is something that's going to be absolutely essential to your business surviving. That being said, costs may dictate that you can't take care of everybody. There may be redundant positions. If you're going to be thinking about downsizing in a pandemic, you're gonna have to consider a couple extra things. You can't just cut off the expense by furloughing somebody. You may have to deal with unemployment claims. You may have to deal with discrimination claims. While the pandemic's clear, that doesn't mean somebody isn't going to say that they were fired for something else. It's a very real issue. I've seen it come across my desk in this. You know, that allegations will be made that people's layoffs are pretextual. I say, you wanted to fire me for this other discriminatory reason, and finally you came up with something that you thought brought you cover. The fact that your business needed to cut costs doesn't mean that you're going to get out of defending that lawsuit. The other thing is the measures you put into place may not be viewed as acceptable to your employees. If you're cutting hours or cutting pay, that doesn't help your employees pay their own rent. That term may be completely unacceptable to the people you've got working for you, and they've got to take care of number one. You know, it's very rare, I think, that an individual employee, especially without equity, views their employer as more important than their own needs. So while you as a business owner have the need and desire to keep your business flowing, it's not the primary need of your employees. Their primary need is, with regard to the job, is a paycheck that covers their needs. The other issue here is the opportunity cost. So you may be able to avoid paying substantial or significant paychecks by downsizing, but when business gets going again, are your people going to come back? Are they going to be happy with the way that they were treated? If you need to reduce hours, reduce pay, they may have found a new job with somebody who was willing to take them on during that time. So you may be setting yourself up for significant additional expenses in rehiring. You may lose team members permanently. There are real issues that you need to be analyzing to make sure that if your business survives, it's able to flourish on the backside of a big crisis like COVID-19. The other issue here we've got at the very bottom relates to your eligibility for government aid. With the Paycheck Protection Program, there were set parameters in there. If you're downsizing beyond what you had in the previous year, then you may be restricted on what kind of forgiveness you can get for the government programs that you participate in. And some of those loans weren't unsubstantial. We've gotten into this slide a little bit already about what your employees' needs are. It's something that they really need. You hopefully have relationships with those employees and that they've invested with your company, but it can't be understated how important it is to view your people as humans and recognize that their needs are not the same as yours. So what we've encouraged here is increased communication, but it may be action too. You may need to do something to let them know that they're cared about. One of the things that we did in our office, and I'd recommend if you've got the ability, we didn't force anyone back to work. When COVID started, we said, go home, take care of yourself, take care of your family. Don't come back until you feel that it's safe, regardless of when the governmental body said you could come back. I said, don't do it until you're ready to be back. Now that didn't stop us from working from home, and we encourage that. We're not furloughing anybody. We want everybody to keep doing your job, and we'll get through this together. And I was pleased with the way that worked out. It isn't necessarily the same for everybody. Obviously, in a manufacturing context, it's entirely different. But if you've got the ability, I would encourage businesses to stick with the people that helps them be successful businesses. Here's another aspect of your employees being humans. We've talked about their feelings and their needs to take care of their own individual crises, but it's entirely possible in a pandemic, and probably likely, especially as you start to deal with bigger and bigger companies, that some of your employees are going to be personally affected by the particular crisis, whatever malady it may be in COVID-19. I heard a terrible story of somebody in the DFW area who contracted COVID-19, and their employer's reaction was to fire them. That is not the type of compassion or company policy that I think will do that company any favors. I think that's the kind of thing that likely results in them getting sued, and the PR may be even worse for it. The claim for firing them that way is one thing, but if it becomes known that you're a company who fires its employees who come down with a global pandemic, it just doesn't seem like the kind of PR that you want, and the kind of PR that you'll have to do to get over that, if it's at all possible, may be extraordinarily expensive. Political opinions. In any size company, it's entirely likely that your staffers are going to have varying political opinions. I saw, well, we'll get to that in a second, but you need to have a company policy that addresses that. And in my opinion, keeping politics out of the workplace is the best way to handle that. There is probably precious little about modern day politics that is relevant to how your employees are doing their jobs, unless of course you're working on a political campaign, and that's what your business does. But there's an example that I think is extremely telling on this one. There's a finance technology company that I read an article about maybe a week ago. They sent out to 10 million of their users an email that essentially encouraged those users to vote for a particular political candidate. It does not matter which candidate it was. The 10 million users, some of them came from different political persuasions, and a lot of the companies who had subscribed to those services did not appreciate one of their vendors telling all their employees how to vote. Now, that fintech company may have made the decision that it was super important to them personally to have a particular candidate in office, but in terms of their business, I think it was probably catastrophic for it. So I'd encourage people to stay away from that, be conscious of it. Reactions are going to be visceral when the topic of politics comes into play. Your customers, these people and companies need to know that you're still in business. They're trying to get their matters handled, whatever they may be, whether they rely on you for products, for services, they're seeking them for some reason. And if you don't make it known that you're still open for business, then they very well may not come and seek your additional services. I know a lot of the online publications regarding businesses had special features available on their websites, whether it be Yelp or anything else, Google My Business, to inquire as to whether you were still open during COVID. And you need to have the people that handle your admin, whether it be an internal team or an external team, go in there and let the public know, yes, you can still come to us for business. New customer acquisition can be extremely tough in a time when you're not allowed to shake people's hands. So the need to tack to different mediums of letting people know that you're in business are greatly increased. You have to get that web presence going and have, remote capabilities to be able to interact with those people. Otherwise, you're going to lose out to the people who do adopt that new technology. There are other issues there about whether your customers can still afford your services. And you're going to need to make a determination about whether those customers are worth keeping. And in some instances, they may not be. In other instances, they're absolutely necessary. So short-term concessions could be something that really benefits you. If your short-term concessions are going to tank your business still, then you may need to think twice about that. So that's where the loss leader determination comes in. It may be beneficial to, if you're maintaining your baseline, to do some business that doesn't necessarily make you a profit, as long as it makes you a market maker, as long as people will come to your services if you think you can weather the storm long enough. Creating that loyalty in a time of trouble could be a great bang for your buck. Keeping Uncle Sam happy. For a lot of businesses, the government doesn't really get involved in their day-to-day operations. You may still need to file your franchise taxes and things like that, and file with the federal government at the end of the year your various tax forms. Sometimes you may need permits and the like, but otherwise a lot of companies kind of start their business operations and don't have a ton of interaction, and a lot of times use vendors to take care of the other government interaction. In a time like that's affected by COVID-19 or a similar virus or other force majeure, the government becomes more and more involved in our lives, telling our employees they can't come to work, telling you can't be within 6 feet of another person, telling you have to wear a mask. Sometimes the rules change rapidly. I think we may have, 30 plus orders from the Supreme Court on how we're supposed to act. We've got various rules from the governor here in Texas telling us when we can do things, when we can't. It's hard to keep track of all of it. Keeping in strict compliance may be impossible. It's definitely going to be tough, but there are some people out there who have drawn attention to their non-compliance. I can think of a particular hairdresser who decided to take a stand and refuse to shut, even though those were the rules. And in that case, I think there was a GoFundMe page that resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars being paid. But I don't think that's a model that should be emulated. I don't think businesses in general will benefit from adopting that. There can only be so many, individual celebrity heroes that benefit from that kind of tactic. As a general strategy, if you're not first and you don't get the attention that you need and that attention isn't positive, then flaunting government rules is likely to get you negative attention rather than positive attention. I know of some companies in town that thought it might be fun to thumb their nose at some of the people and policymakers implementing those rules, and what they found were their offices raided and mask policies enforced, and they were subjected to fines. And that certainly may not have been the desired reaction from those businesses, and I can't imagine how it's beneficial to those companies at all. Keeping your community happy. You may have people who aren't even your customers start to think that the way you're conducting your business is offensive, and that can have a huge effect on it. Your actual customers may not want to be seen as being associated with you if there is significant attention being brought to your business that's negative. Another thing, the comment we have up here is, would you rather be perceived as a profiteer or a great employer? I've seen different instances with a company this year who is involved in providing personal protective equipment, PPE, and they were selling it in excess of $5 a mask. And for a lot of people, that seems like a ridiculous cost. And it doesn't really matter what that business's underlying cost was. The simple fact that they were out there, selling masks for $5 a piece, had the public enraged, especially if the public may be some of the purchasers of those masks. There are a lot of government entities out there who are required to buy those masks or feel the need to do it to keep their operations going. So the simple fact that the public sees money going to your company in an amount that they don't feel is appropriate may result in some serious backlash. You can see it with Amazon, for example. I think a lot of attention's been paid to Jeff Bezos being the richest person in the world and his perceived net worth having increased drastically during this time. It's a strange dynamic. Amazon's business is shipping all sorts of necessities to people's houses, and everybody's locked in their house, not allowed to go to the store. It makes sense that they'd make so much money, but that doesn't change the fact that people are perceiving it as gross profiteering, and you can't really change that. So the public scorn that comes from that is really something that you need to pay attention to, and you may want to think about being a different kind of community steward. Here's a fun image that I stole from a fake news website, satirical. If you can't see from your screens, what we have there is a series of yachts purportedly owned by celebrities and other rich people who have spelled out, "We're all in this together." That's not really the message that might make the general public feel better. There are other ways to approach it that may be a lot more effective. We saw something happen with the Dallas Mavericks, I believe, who agreed to pay the wages of their food service employees, despite the fact that a lot of the games weren't happening. The overall cost for that may not have been expensive at all. I mean, if you think about it, they may be paying those people $10 an hour. Maybe they have 200 staffers there doing that, working 4-hour shifts during games. That's $8,000 for what, a sports league that has 41 home games a year. That's $328,000 maybe on the top end that they agreed to pay to people who weren't performing work in an industry where they make millions, and the teams generally have values of in excess of $1 billion. It's an extraordinarily small cost to take care of hundreds of people in the community, and to put that notice out there that we're taking care of people that need it. That's a much better example of doing big business the right way. The other great thing about that particular marketing campaign, because it was great marketing and great PR, is that it was done in advance. Advertising your good deeds after the fact is likely only going to be seen as self-serving rather than taking care of people. Look at the wonderful things that we've done is not a great message, especially when delivered in the first person. What's a lot more effective is saying, come help us do great things. We encourage other people to do these. That's the right way to convey we're all in this together. We've seen other great successes. I know of one restaurant that was adjacent to a medical facility, and they implemented a policy that allowed customers to buy a meal for an essential worker. So that particular restaurant set up an online feature on their website and said, if you pay for a meal, we'll take it over to a doctor, we'll take it over to a nurse, we'll take it over to a staffer at the hospital next door. They created a program that allowed people in the community to do good and take care of people who were exposing themselves to COVID-19 for everybody else's benefit. And at the same time, that restaurant started bringing in a lot more revenue. They were able to continue their business at a time where they weren't allowed to have people in their restaurant. And I think that strategy of theirs may have driven more business and cut more costs than they ever had to deal with when they were limited to their seating capacity. I've seen other successes. Companies, even small ones, contractors going into the plexiglass divider creation. It's an opportunity that people saw to help others during this time and maintain their revenues. There are construction companies who have gone out and found empty lots and created basically a luxury service. If they're not building buildings, then they can have people come out and play with a bulldozer for a day, play with a backhoe for a day. There are people right now in this crisis who are desperate to get outside and do things to have some semblance of fun, because this process has been frustrating for everybody. So for a construction company, even without any work, to create this opportunity for people to come do nothing, it benefited them, it benefited the community, and it's things like that, this outside the box thinking that may help some types of businesses get through this. There are other companies doing advanced sales. You can sell stuff now for services or goods that you don't have to deliver or perform much into the future. I've seen a paintball company in town that was selling advanced tickets, buy a bundle, come back 5 times for a super cheap price. There are other positive aspects to this. It's a little bit like the gift card industry. A lot of those cards and offers may never get used. So you're in some sense, you're able to sell goods and services that you don't have to deliver today. And that's wonderful in terms of keeping up with your costs, which you do have to pay today. And the other benefit to that is you may never have to pay for the costs associated with performing. Automation is another key thing. And this really dovetails in with your employees a little bit. You may find that there are redundancies in your office. You may find that you didn't need all the real estate space that you've got, all the square footage footprint you've got at your office. People aren't leasing new offices as much. Your landlord may negotiate with you. Some of your staff may not be necessary at all. And it's tough to make that realization. As we talked about, they're humans that have their needs. At the same time, if you've got people who are working for you, but not really driving your business, then a situation like COVID is an opportunity to analyze the impact that those workers have. In other instances, it's completely necessary. Event planners in this time. In an age where events aren't allowed to happen, your event planner may not be necessary. The problem you may have there, as we discussed earlier, is when the bans on gatherings are lifted, are you going to be able to get your quality staff back? Eliminating downtime is something that really fits in with this. With your extra employees that you've got whose regular jobs may not be so necessary, if you make the decision to keep them on, now is a great time to figure out how to put them into use in other ways to help your business thrive. You may be able to take your marketing team in-house. For something like a law firm, it's a great opportunity to build your form bank or a different company to pre-populate orders. Now is a time where you can start doing the foundational work on things that you expect to be doing in the future. Not biting off more than you can chew in the age of Corona is real important. There are obvious things happening, whether that be the PPE that we talked about earlier. People need it. The question is, does your company have the ability to jump in and satisfy that need? And if they do, if your company can handle that aspect of it, can you also become known as the person in the market who delivers that? Those two things require very different skill sets, but you need to have both for it to be effective. As a law firm, one of the things that we discussed that was so clear to us is bankruptcies are coming. And so what we had to analyze is, do we have time to become experts on bankruptcy? And if we do have time to do that, how do we let people know to come to us for bankruptcy? And in our case, we saw that both those hurdles couldn't be satisfied. And so we just didn't do it. And I think across the spectrum, there are lots of businesses that can find a need in a time of crisis, but you've got to run through that decision tree and see if that's something that'll work for you. So we've got several do's and don'ts here that kind of summarize what we've been over so far. You've got to know your business. You've got to know where your revenues come from, what your expenses are. You've got to know where you're headed. There's the old expression, talking about shooting for the stars, and you may end up somewhere where you're up in the sky, but it's not really what you're going for. So I think you need to begin with the end in mind. And in terms of surviving the pandemic, it's maintaining your chance to, if not maintain profitability, to reach it again before you get to a breaking point. You need to focus on things you can control. There are a lot of things during a pandemic that are going to be completely outside of that. We can't control how long it's going to take. We can't control the individual needs of our employees, but we can adapt. We can do things to best handle the adversity that we're dealing with. In terms of the don'ts, shooting from the hip is dangerous. If you're just playing fast and loose, if you're just saying drive more business, drive more business, drive more business, you may find yourself in a position where you can't handle all of it. In the context of a law firm, you may be signing up cases left and right, but even in Corona, those cases have deadlines. The same for any given project. If you can't deliver on time, then you shouldn't be signing up that new work. The emerging laws that are happening, they can come to bite you in a real big way. In terms of event planning, for example, I've seen lots of things come up during Corona, whether they be weddings or birthday parties or quinceañeras. There are people who have contracted to do special events, and a lot of those companies out there are keeping people's down payments regardless of the fact that some of those events are illegal to host in the way that they were done. That kind of thing is going to get a lot of those companies sued. And the idea that those companies can hang on to that money and that their customers are going to let them and going to forgive them for it, I think are severely misguided. With regard to the perceptions of others, that we've talked about that, with our yacht saying we're in this together, but in business it happens too. I think there was a Former Disney star who was in the news this week, who had spent $45,000 personally on COVID tests so that she could continue to run her business. And the backlash from that, from people who don't even, who aren't patrons of her business, was that you've spent a ton of money having daily tests, which affects the ability of other people in the community to get those tests when they may be sick. A lot of people need one test. So for somebody to be having 30 a month, it's going to look bad to other people, and that may impact you. On the other side of that, there was another celebrity, I think this week, who decided to have a 40th birthday party on a private island in the middle of her state's, non-essential travel ban. If your business is being a celebrity, maybe being in the news is good for you, regardless of whether people are yelling at you or not. You just want people talking about you. In most businesses, I don't know that the saying all publicity is good publicity holds up. I think bad publicity is something that can really hammer businesses in a crisis for the exact reason that we talked about earlier. Your actual customers may fear being associated with you if you're perceived as a company that doesn't care about the community. There's a marketing firm here in Dallas that I think is really seeing how true that is. Public pressure is an enormous thing on business, and you don't want to be perceived as being on the wrong side of this. And for that reason, in a lot of respects, a valid plan for businesses may be to keep doing what they're doing privately for their customers and not seek to be a headline maker in the news.